When I said I'd be alone tonight, she smiled and said, "Then I'll stay with you." The night Callum showed up to Owen's apartment with 2 bags of drinks nobody asked him to bring, he already knew he wasn't going to be okay. He knew it the same way you know a storm is coming before the sky changes. Something in the air, something in the chest, that low, quiet pressure that sits right behind the ribs and doesn't announce itself and doesn't leave. He just kept walking anyway. Owen's place was on the 3rd floor of a building that smelled like old carpet and someone's cooking from 2 units over. Callum took the stairs instead of the elevator because he needed the extra 30 seconds to arrange his face. He was good at arranging his face. 3 weeks of practice had made him excellent at it. By the time he knocked on the door, he looked like a man who was doing just fine. "You brought drinks." Owen opened the door and stared at the bags. "Figured why not. Nobody told you to bring drinks." "Nobody told me not to." Owen laughed and moved aside to let him in. That was the thing about Owen. He never pushed. He just opened the door and let you figure yourself out. The apartment was small and warm and already had 7 or 8 people in it, the kind of gathering that calls itself casual but still has candles on the table. Callum recognized most of the faces. He half knew all of them, which is a very specific kind of loneliness, being surrounded by people you like but don't quite know where you stand with. He set the drinks on the kitchen counter and immediately made himself useful. Opened bottles, filled glasses, asked people what they wanted before they could ask themselves. He moved around the room like a man with a job to do, which was exactly the point. The conversation was good. Someone was talking about a road trip that went wrong in 3 different states. Someone else was debating whether a hot dog is a sandwich with the kind of intensity usually reserved for things that actually matter. Callum laughed at the right moments. He leaned against the wall with his drink and nodded and asked follow-up questions, and was, by all visible measures, a person who was having a normal time at a normal gathering. He was performing it, every second of it. And then he noticed her. She was sitting on the arm of the couch near the window, not quite part of any one conversation, but not removed from them either. She had the specific quality of someone who is comfortable in their own quiet, like she didn't need to fill every silence to prove she existed. Her name was Nadia. He'd met her once before, briefly, at something Owen had thrown together in the summer. He remembered thinking she had a way of listening that made you feel like what you were saying actually mattered. He hadn't talked to her much that night. He hadn't talked to anyone much that night either, for different reasons. She caught him looking. He looked away first. The evening moved the way those evenings do, loose and unhurried, conversations folding into other conversations, the candles burning lower, people slowly beginning to gather their things. By 10:30, the room had thinned considerably. By 11, it was just 4 of them, then 3. Then Callum found himself standing near the door with his jacket over his arm, doing the performance of leaving. Keys, check. Phone, check. The look around the room that says everything is in order. "You're heading out?" Owen asked. "Yeah," he said it easy, practiced. "I'll be alone tonight anyway, so no point in staying too late." He meant it as nothing, a throwaway line, the kind of thing you say when you're filling space between the actual goodbye. Owen was about to say something. Callum could see it forming. But Nadia got there first. She had been quiet for the last 10 minutes, sitting in the chair near the window with her glass balanced on her knee, and he had almost forgotten she was still in the room. She looked at him the way you look at a door that has a crack in it, not alarmed, not pitying, just noticing. Then she smiled. It wasn't a polite smile. It wasn't the kind of smile people use when they don't know what else to do. It was small and certain, like she had already made a decision before the conversation started. "Then I'll stay with you," she said. The room didn't react dramatically. Owen looked mildly surprised. Callum stood there with his jacket over his arm and had no idea what to do with a sentence that wasn't asking him for anything. You don't have to do that, he said. I know, she said. She picked up her code. That was it. That was the whole negotiation. No further discussion. No long explanation of what it meant or what she expected or what he owed her in return. She just stood up, said good night to Owen, and walked to the door like this was a thing that had already been decided, like she was simply informing him of a plan that had been in place before he knew about it. He followed her out. They walked down the 3 flights of stairs without talking. Their footsteps were slightly out of sync. He kept waiting for her to explain herself, to add a qualifier, to give him the footnote version of what this was. She didn't. Outside, the night was cold and sharp the way early autumn always is, like the air has made up its mind after weeks of indecision. The street was mostly quiet. A few cars. The yellow warmth from a corner shop 2 blocks down. My car's that way, he said, nodding left. Okay, she said, and turned left with him. He unlocked the car. She got in the passenger seat like she'd done it 100 times. He sat in the driver's seat and looked out at the dark street for a moment before he started the engine. You actually don't have to do this, he said one more time, because he felt like he needed to say it again, for the record. She turned and looked at him, not annoyed, not soft either, just level. I know I don't have to, she said. That's why I'm doing it. He started the car. For the first 4 minutes of the drive, neither of them said anything. The radio was on at a volume too low to actually hear, just enough to fill the edges of the silence. The streets were amber-lit and empty, the city in that quiet phase it enters after midnight when even the noise takes a break. He gripped the wheel and thought about all the ways he could redirect this. He could take her home first. He could say he'd changed his mind, that he was fine, that he'd been misread. He could do any number of things that would restore the correct distance between himself and another human being. He drove toward his apartment instead. He didn't examine why. There is a specific kind of loneliness that doesn't look like loneliness from the outside. It doesn't come with obvious signs. It doesn't make you cry in public or cancel plans or stop eating. It's quieter than that. It's the kind that lives in the ordinary moments. The drive home, the unlocked door, the kitchen light that comes on and illuminates exactly how much space there is around you. Callum had been living in that kind of loneliness for 3 weeks. He hadn't told anyone how bad the nights had gotten. Not Owen, who would have listened. Not his sister, who would have worried. He'd kept it inside the apartment walls where it belonged, and he'd managed it. And every morning he'd arranged his face and gone out into the world and been a person who was doing just fine. Tonight, for reasons he couldn't fully explain, a woman he barely knew had decided to stay. He pulled into the parking spot outside his building, turned off the engine, and sat for a second. 3rd floor, he said, no elevator. Good, she said, I needed the steps. He almost smiled. Almost. They went inside, and the apartment door closed behind them, and the quiet of the night settled around them both. Nadia set her coat over the back of the nearest chair like she was comfortable, like comfort was something she decided to bring with her. Callum stood in the middle of his own living room and felt, very briefly, like a stranger in it. Do you have tea? She asked from the kitchen. She had already walked into it. She was already opening the second cabinet from the left. How did you know it was in that cabinet? It's always in that cabinet, she said. Tea is always in the second cabinet. It's a universal law. That's not a universal law. It is where I come from. He didn't know where she came from. He realized he knew almost nothing about her. He realized also that she was already filling the kettle like someone who had decided to be useful before anyone could tell her not to be. He sat down at the kitchen table, and for the first time all evening he stopped performing. Not because he made a decision to, just because there was nobody left to perform for. She found the mugs on the first try. She stood at the counter waiting for the kettle, and the kitchen was warm, and the clock on the wall said 11:42, and Callum sat in his chair and looked at the table and breathed. The kettle began to hiss. Outside, the city made its quiet sounds. He had said he would be alone tonight. He had been right about that, too, in every way that counted. But somehow, right now, the alone felt different. It felt like the kind you could survive. The kettle clicked off. Nadia set both mugs on the table and sat down across from him. The tea was too hot to drink yet. She wrapped her hands around her mug anyway, like she was borrowing the warmth. Neither of them spoke for a moment. Then she said, "What's the worst film you've ever seen?" He blinked. "I'm sorry." "Worst film ever seen, go." He looked at her. She was completely serious. The kind of serious that is actually the highest form of commitment to a ridiculous question. He thought about it. "There was one," he said slowly, "about a man who could communicate with cheese." She didn't laugh immediately. She stared at him with the focus of someone collecting evidence. "Communicate how?" she asked. "Just talk to it. The cheese would give him life advice." "Did the cheese have a voice?" "Low, gravelly, like a retired geography teacher." She pressed her lips together, fighting it, and then she lost the fight and laughed, a real laugh, not a polite one, the kind that has breath behind it and catches you slightly off guard with how genuine it is. He felt something loosen in his chest. "Okay," she said, recovering. "That is objectively terrible. My entry is a film about a man who falls in love with a hat." "A hat?" "A fedora." It was a whole emotional arc. The hat had a complicated past. "Did it speak?" "No, that was the tragedy. It could only express itself through being worn at various angles." He laughed. It had a weird sound at the end of it, the sound of a laugh that has been held in too long. He noticed it himself, the strangeness of it, the realness. She pretended not to notice. That was the kind thing to do, and she did it without making it feel like kindness. The tea cooled to the right temperature. They drank it. She tucked one leg under her on the chair like she'd been sitting in this kitchen for years. She talked about a neighborhood cat that had appointed itself the authority on who could park on a particular street. He told her about the time Owen had confidently given him directions to a restaurant that turned out to be a storage facility. She asked whether dumplings could technically be classified as soup. He argued no. She argued that the definition of soup was more flexible than people were willing to admit, and that rigidity on this issue said something unflattering about a person's character. He argued back. She held her position with the kind of calm certainty that meant she had thought about this before. It was midnight, then 12:30. Then the clock said something he didn't check because he had stopped watching it. He realized at some point that he had laughed 4 times, real laughing, the sort with the strange sound at the end. He hadn't laughed like that in 3 weeks. He hadn't laughed like that since before the ending of a thing he wasn't ready to talk about yet and might not be ready to talk about for some time. And the fact that he was laughing now, in his own kitchen, at 11:40-something, with a woman who was defending the soup status of dumplings, it landed somewhere tender. He didn't let that show. He kept his face arranged, old habit. At one point he made the mistake of saying, "You really didn't have to come." She set her mug down. She looked at him the way you look at someone who has just said something that is both completely understandable and quietly heartbreaking. "I know," she said. 2 words, no addition to them, no explanation or reassurance or qualifier. Just 2 words that somehow contained more than a paragraph could have. He nodded. He looked at the table. He didn't push for more. They moved to the living room at some point, the natural migration that happens when a kitchen conversation has run long enough to deserve softer chairs. The lamp was on, the overhead light off, which turned everything warm and low. She sat at one end of the couch. He sat at the other. There was a respectful distance between them, The kind that says I know where I am and you know where you are and nobody is confused about this. He put something on the television. Neither of them really watched it. It became background noise, the visual equivalent of the radio in the car. She was asking him about the neighborhood, how long he'd lived there, whether he liked it, when he caught himself actually answering. Not the short version. The real version. The bit about how he'd moved here because it felt like the right distance from the part of the city where he'd lived before, close enough to be familiar, far enough that he wouldn't run into the wrong memories on his morning walk. He caught himself mid-sentence. She watched him with that same quality of listening she'd had at the gathering, like she was genuinely there, inside the words, not waiting for her turn. "Sorry," he said, "that was more than you asked for." "It was exactly what I asked for," she said. He didn't know how to receive that, so he looked back at the television. She didn't push. That was the thing about her that kept catching him, the consistent absence of pressure. Most people, when they sat with someone who was clearly carrying something heavy, leaned in with questions, with concern that edged into intrusion, with the need to be the person who helped, who fixed, who extracted the story so they could feel useful. Nadia just sat there, present and quiet and completely without agenda. He didn't know what to do with that except feel it. An hour passed. The television show ended and rolled into another. She was less animated now, her responses coming slower, the rhythm of someone moving toward sleep without quite giving into it. He was wide awake. He was always wide awake at this hour. That was the part nobody saw. During the day he was functional and even cheerful. At night the ceiling became the most interesting thing in the room, and he would stare at it and think thoughts he would rather not have, and the apartment would be very quiet in all the wrong ways. He thought about that as he sat in the warm light of his living room, and she was half asleep at the other end of the couch, and the television played something that didn't matter. He had said he would be alone tonight. He had been wrong about that. He wasn't entirely sure, sitting there in the quiet, how he felt about being wrong, but wrong had never felt quite this warm before. At some point she leaned her head back against the couch cushion. Her eyes were closed. Her breathing was slower. He looked at the ceiling. Not with the usual feeling. With something he couldn't name yet. He didn't mean to say it. That was the truth of it. It wasn't planned, wasn't the result of some decision to open up. It came out of the specific, unguarded quality of the space between 2 in the morning and 3, when the body has given up on pretending, and the mind starts speaking before the filter arrives. The television had gone quiet. Some late show had ended and rolled into an advertisement for something neither of them was buying. Nadia was mostly asleep against the cushion, her breathing slow, her hands still folded in her lap the way they'd been folded for the last hour. Callum was staring at the ceiling, his usual position for this particular hour. And then, without planning it, he said, "The nights have been bad." Not loud, almost a statement to himself, the kind of sentence that slips out of you before you realize it's moving. He felt her shift slightly beside him. One eye opened. She didn't say anything, which was the correct response and somehow the most unexpected one. He kept going, not because he wanted to, because the filter had failed and the hour was late, and there was something about her particular quality of attention that made honesty feel less dangerous than it usually did. "After everything," he said, "I thought the days would be the hard part. Turns out the days are manageable. You stay busy. You go places, you talk to people." He paused. "Then the days end." He stopped there. He could feel himself wanting to retreat into something lighter, something with an easy ending, something that would let him close the sentence and not have to sit in it. She didn't say anything. She was listening with her whole body, the way she did, not leaning in aggressively, not offering anything, just being there with the quality of someone who will stay regardless. "You don't have to," he started. "I'm not doing anything," she said, Her voice was quiet, slightly rough from near sleep. "I'm just here." He looked at the ceiling. 3 weeks, he said. "That's how long it's been. And the days I can do. I've gotten good at the days." He breathed out slowly. "It's just the 3 in the morning that's been difficult." The word difficult was wrong, and he knew it. It was a smaller word than the truth. But it was the word he had available to him at 2:47 in the morning, and he let it stand. She didn't correct it. What she did was quieter than that, and larger. She reached over and placed her hand on top of his. Not romantic in the way films would have you believe touch is always romantic. Not clinical either. It was just a hand, over his hand. The weight of it present and deliberate, like she was saying with her palm what she couldn't say with any combination of words because no combination would have been enough. He looked down at it. He didn't move. Not because he was afraid to, because he didn't want to. Because the hand was grounding him in a way he hadn't known he needed. The way you press a hand to a wall in the dark to remember where you are. 3 weeks of perfectly arranged faces. 3 weeks of managed days and unmanageable nights. 3 weeks of nobody knowing, really knowing, the shape of what the evenings felt like when the door closed and the city outside went quiet, and the ceiling became the only thing available to look at. And here was this. A hand on top of his. The ceiling waited, he didn't look at it. He sat there and breathed in and breathed out, and let the weight of her hand keep him present, and didn't say a single word about what was moving through him, because there wasn't a word for it that wouldn't make it smaller. She didn't move her hand. He didn't ask her to. The advertisement on the television finished. Something else began. He couldn't have told you what it was. The clock on the wall kept its quiet count. He wasn't looking at the ceiling. Morning arrived the way mornings do, when you've been up past 3, gray and blunt at the edges, the light coming in sideways through the curtains, the body knowing it was later than it felt like. Callum woke up sitting mostly upright on his own couch, which wasn't the most comfortable thing he had ever done, but also wasn't the worst he'd managed in recent weeks. He was alone on the couch. For one disorienting second, he thought the whole thing, the gathering, the drive, the kitchen and the tea and the conversation about cheese and dumplings, and the hand on his hand at 2:47 in the morning, had been something he invented. Then he smelled coffee. He turned his head and found Nadia in the kitchen. She had found the coffee without any help from him. She was standing at the counter with a mug already in her hand, looking out the small window at the street below, and she looked like someone who was comfortable with mornings and didn't require any preparation to exist in them. He sat up and pushed his hair back. "How did you find the coffee?" he asked. She turned around. Same cabinet logic, universally applicable. He looked toward the kitchen. She had set a second mug out, already filled. He stood up slowly, the way you stand when the body is asking politely what exactly it was subjected to the previous night, and walked to the kitchen. He picked up the mug, drank. It was strong, stronger than he usually made it. Apparently her universal cabinet logic extended to coffee-to-water ratios. "Strong," he said. "Good for mornings that earned it," she said. He didn't ask what that meant, he felt it. She was fully dressed. Her coat was already draped over her arm, which meant she had made a decision at some point while he was asleep, a decision that was kind in its efficiency. She wasn't going to make this strange or ceremonious. She wasn't going to extend the night into something it wasn't. He appreciated that, in a way, he didn't know how to say. They stood in the kitchen and drank their coffee without the same ease as the night before. Mornings are different things than nights. They carry a different kind of light, a different kind of awareness. At 2 in the morning, things that are real feel like they belong only to themselves. At 8 in the morning, everything has to contend with the ordinary world again. But it wasn't uncomfortable. She asked if he had eaten. He said he would manage. She said that was exactly what someone who hadn't eaten would say. He found bread in the cabinet and made toast, because the alternative was continuing to defend a position that had no defense. She borrowed his toothbrush. Not with a question attached. Just, "Can I borrow your toothbrush?" "Yes," he said, before he thought about whether he minded. He thought about whether he minded after. He found that he didn't. She reappeared a few minutes later and set the toothbrush back in its holder with the matter-of-fact ease of a person who had decided not to be strange about anything today. He ate his toast. She finished her coffee. The morning went on. At some point she looked at her phone and said she had somewhere to be. She said it without apology, without performance. She put her coat on and picked up her bag, and the whole process took about 45 seconds, which was the most refreshing thing he had seen in recent memory, someone who could exit without making an event of it. He walked her to the door. She was halfway out into the hall when something in him moved before his better judgment could intervene. "Nadia." She turned. He looked at her. He didn't know how to ask what he wanted to ask without making it too large or too small. He settled for direct. "Why did you stay?" She looked at him for a moment, actually thought. He watched her think about it. She wasn't reaching for a prepared answer. She was finding the true one. Then she said, "Because you said you'd be alone." Like it was obvious. Like it was always only that simple. No additional reasoning. No romantic layer underneath it. No calculated kindness or need for his gratitude or desire to be the person who helped. Just he had said a thing and she had heard it, and she had decided it was a reason. She turned and walked down the hall. He stood in the doorway and watched her go. He stood there for longer than he probably needed to, until she turned the corner, until the sound of her steps on the stairs faded out. He went back inside and closed the door. He stood in the middle of his apartment. The morning light was coming properly through the windows now, filling the corners, catching the dust on the bookshelf he kept meaning to clean. His coffee mug was on the counter. Her mug was next to it, rinsed out. The 2 pieces of toast he'd made were finished. The toothbrush was back in its holder. Evidence of a night that had happened. He sat down on the couch where she'd sat, where he'd sat, where something had passed between them at 2:47 in the morning that he didn't have a language for yet. He held his mug with both hands. He turned her words over like a stone. "Because you said you'd be alone." He thought about all the times he had said he was fine, all the practiced, arranged sentences, all the correct performances of okayness. He had said 100 things in the past 3 weeks and meant half of them, and all of them had landed and been accepted, and nobody had followed up. He had said one honest thing, a throwaway line half meant, dropped into the end of a sentence, and she had caught it. He hadn't even known he was throwing anything. He sat in his apartment for a long time that morning, not staring at the ceiling, just sitting, just thinking. The second mug sat rinsed and dry on his kitchen counter. He looked at it. He did not know what Nadia was to him. He did not know what to call the previous night, or where to file it, or whether it would repeat. He did not know what any of this meant in the categories he'd been using to understand people. But he knew this. She had heard the quiet, true thing he'd said without knowing he was saying it, and she had responded to the truth instead of the performance. And that was something. That was something he didn't have a word for, and didn't need one yet. He finished his coffee. He washed both mugs. He stood at the sink and looked out the window at the morning street below, where a man was walking a dog that seemed extremely opinionated about which direction they should go, and a woman in a red coat was unlocking a bicycle, and the city was resuming its ordinary business with the ease of something that has never once stopped. He watched it. He breathed. He felt, for the first time in 3 weeks, like the days ahead were a thing he could move toward rather than a thing he had to get through. That was enough for now. That was more than enough. He texted her on a Tuesday. not a significant day, not a milestone or an anniversary of anything. Tuesday arrived the same way Tuesdays always do, quietly, without permission, carrying the specific weight of being the day that is least remarkable in any given week. Callum was on his lunch break. He was sitting outside a cafe 2 blocks from the office with a sandwich he wasn't paying much attention to, and he was scrolling through his phone without purpose, the way you scroll when you're not really looking for anything, just needing something to do with your hands. He stopped at her name. He looked at it for a moment. He thought about the way she had left, clean and unhurried and without ceremony. The way she had said, "Because you said you'd be alone," like the simplest things were the ones that required no explanation. He thought about the second mug, rinsed and set beside his on the counter. He thought about the hand on his at 2:47 in the morning, the specific weight of it, the way it had asked for nothing. He pulled up their message thread. They had exchanged exactly 3 texts before this moment. All practical, all from the night Owen had introduced them briefly, logistics about a time and a location that were now months irrelevant. He typed, "There's a dumpling place 2 streets from the market that I think is actually soup." He stared at it. He sent it. He put his phone face down on the table. He picked up his sandwich and ate a third of it and stared at the street. His phone buzzed. He turned it over. Her reply, "That's deeply irresponsible of them." 2 words and no punctuation, and exactly right. He put the phone down again. He picked up the rest of his sandwich. He ate it. He sat in the weak Tuesday sunlight and looked at the people passing on the street and felt something moving in him that he didn't rush to identify. That evening, he didn't watch the ceiling. He noticed this fact somewhere around 11:30, when he was lying in bed and the room was quiet and the city was doing its quiet things outside. He noticed that he had been lying there for 20 minutes and his eyes had not found the ceiling once. He had been thinking about the dumpling place, about the text, about her 2-word reply, about the particular quality of someone who answers the small things the same way they answer the large ones, with the same attention, the same honesty, the same refusal to perform. He turned onto his side. He thought about what she had said at the door. "Because you said you'd be alone." He had been turning it over all week. Every time he thought he had understood it fully, it showed him a new side. Not like a riddle, but like a coin, simple and 2-sided and complete, worth exactly what it was worth, no inflation needed. The honest reading was this: she had heard a true thing and responded to it. But there was a second reading underneath, one that had been coming up slowly all week the way groundwater comes up through soil, patient, quiet, inevitable. He had been performing okayness for 3 weeks to every person he knew, to Owen, who would have listened, to his sister, who would have worried, to colleagues, to friends, to the entirety of his social world. He had arranged his face and delivered the correct sentences, and nobody had looked past them. And then he had said one unguarded sentence, a nothing sentence, half meant, not even aimed at anyone in particular, and she had caught it. Which meant she had been paying attention. Which meant she saw the real thing under the arranged thing. Which meant she had responded not to Callum the performed version, but to Callum the actual one, the one that lived at 2:47 in the morning with the ceiling and the quiet and the nights that had been bad. He lay in the dark and let that land. It landed somewhere deep. He called his sister the next morning, first call in 2 months. He didn't explain why. She didn't ask why. She just answered and said, "Oh good, it's you," like she'd been waiting, like she'd had the patience to wait because she knew eventually he would call. They talked for 40 minutes about nothing in particular. Their father's habit of mispronouncing the names of foods he'd eaten for 30 years. The film she had seen recently that had made her cry in a way she wasn't prepared for. A plan they'd been meaning to make for 3 years about going somewhere together, somewhere coastal, somewhere where you could sit and eat something and look at water and not have to be anything in particular. He said yes to the plan. He meant it. After he hung up, he stood in his kitchen and made himself breakfast. Real breakfast, not toast grabbed on the way to something else. Eggs. Coffee strong enough to have opinions. He stood at the counter and ate it and watched the street from the window and listened to the ordinary morning sounds of his building. A door 2 floors up, a conversation in the stairwell, someone's music briefly audible and then gone. His apartment looked the same as it always had. But something had moved. The furniture hadn't shifted. Nothing was different in the arrangement of things, and yet the light came in differently. Or maybe he was standing in a different part of it. Or maybe the room was the same and he was the thing that had moved, even slightly, even just enough to change the angle. He thought about Nadia. He thought about what she was to him. He didn't have a word. He had tried several out during the week, in the privacy of his own head, and none of them fit correctly. Friend was too casual for someone who had sat with him at 2:47 in the morning. Something more was too presumptuous for someone he still only half knew. Stranger was the one that fit the facts but not the feeling. He decided the word didn't matter. What mattered was this: she had shown up. Not because he asked her to, not because anything required her to, not because there was an obvious reward in it or a relationship structure that made it obligatory. He had said a true thing, and she had responded to the truth, and she had stayed because the staying seemed like the right thing, the only logical response to a person who was going to be alone on a night that was going to be difficult. She hadn't needed it to be more than that. And he was beginning to understand that this specific, uncomplicated, unrewarded act of simply showing up was the rarest thing one person could do for another. He had been given things in his life that came dressed in larger language, declarations and promises and elaborate gestures, things that arrived with explanations of how much they cost, things that required maintenance and reciprocation and a careful accounting of who had given what. This had been a mug of tea, a borrowed toothbrush, a hand placed over his in the dark, 2 words with no punctuation. And it was the most he had felt cared for in longer than he could comfortably calculate. He washed the breakfast dishes. He got ready for work. He walked out of his apartment into the morning, down 3 flights of stairs, out into the street where the air was cool and smelled like the beginning of something, and the city was already moving with its usual confident indifference. He walked 2 blocks. He stopped outside the dumpling place. He looked at it through the window. Small, warm light inside. A few people already sitting at the tables, eating, talking, being ordinary and alive in the way that people who are happy to be where they are tend to look. He texted her again. Confirmed categorically soup. They have broth. There's no coming back from broth. He kept walking. His phone buzzed in his pocket. He didn't check it for half a block, just to see what it felt like to let the good thing wait a moment before you opened it. It felt fine. It felt like something you do when you know the good thing will still be there. He checked it. Her reply: "This changes everything. We need to talk about what you stand for." He laughed out loud on the street, the strange laugh with the sound at the end of it. A man walking a bicycle glanced at him. He didn't mind. He kept walking. He thought about the outline of the days ahead, not with the dread he'd been carrying for 3 weeks, not with the ceiling staring, 2:47 in the morning quality of survival. With something that felt different from that. Lighter. Not fixed, he wasn't fixed. Things weren't resolved, the world was still the complicated thing it had always been. But different. He thought about his sister and the coastal plan. He thought about calling Owen this week for no reason. He thought about the dumpling place and whether it was actually soup, and whether it mattered what category it fell into as long as it was good. He thought about the simplest version of the truth, the one Nadia had known before he knew it himself. Sometimes a person is going to be alone on a difficult night. Sometimes another person shows up. Not because they have to, not because it's convenient, not because there is a structure or a label or a formal understanding between them that requires it. Just because they heard the quiet true thing underneath the arranged thing, and they decided that was enough reason. That it would always be enough reason. He had spent 3 weeks believing that getting through the nights alone was the only option, not because nobody around him was capable of being present, because he had never given anyone the true sentence. He had given her one, by accident, and she had walked through the door it opened without him even knowing he had opened it. He thought about what that meant, about what it required of him going forward, about the small courage of saying the honest thing, even the throwaway honest thing, even the sentence that slips out at the end of a night when your guard has slipped for just a second. He thought about how often the most important doors are the ones you open without knowing what you're doing. His building was behind him, the office was ahead, the morning was clear and cold, and the city didn't care either way. He walked toward the office. He walked without performing anything. Just walked. Some nights are going to be alone and difficult and long, and the ceiling will be a familiar companion, and the 3 in the morning will ask its usual hard questions. But some nights that begin with a throwaway sentence and end with tea in a warm kitchen and a hand in the dark, some nights teach you something about the world. Not that it is good, not that it is safe, not that the hard things get smaller. Just that you are worth staying for. Just that someone, somewhere, might hear the honest thing you say without meaning to, and decide that's reason enough. Just that the door can open. Even when you didn't know you were reaching for it. Even when the only thing you said was, "I'll be alone tonight." And somewhere across a warm, low-lit room, someone smiled and said, "Then I'll stay with you." And meant it. And stayed.